Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? Happy New Year. How was your New Year? How are you doing? What are you wanting to create more of this year? What are you wanting to create less of? This may be the episode that you don't hear, although if you're hearing this, it's going through. Jen and I have not been able to record together, and I'm feeling really behind on recordings, and we're scheduled to record in 40 minutes. But I was hoping maybe I could squeeze in a solo episode. I don't know how it's going to go. Just being transparent with you. I wanted to talk a little bit today about some awarenesses that I'm having with being diagnosed autistic. I'm seeing how my PDA, if you are a first-time listener, you don't know what PDA is. It stands for Pathological Demand Avoidance. I don't really want anything that has the name pathological in it. So the other term is pervasive or persistent drive for autonomy. It's interesting. I took a training about a week ago with a trainer that I love. If you're a therapist and you want to take any trainings about neurodivergence, Cascadia Training has amazing trainings. And this is the second training that I've taken with this trainer. And part of the training is we looked at the DSM criteria for ADHD and autism, of which I have both. And I have a formal diagnosis for my autism. And I look at the criteria and I don't see myself. I don't see it in the ADHD. I don't see it in the autism. And I'm having this incredible frustration around if you have a brain that likes things in nice boxes, you want to be able to feel that things are organized and they make sense. And when I look at the criteria, it just does not make sense to me and it doesn't compute. So when I talk to you about PDA, it's also the same thing that often if you see PDA in young children, it's often misdiagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder. And in younger children, these are kids that are very social, that when we think of stereotypical autism, we think of it's a myth that autistics aren't empathic and don't have empathy. But we think of someone who is your stereotypical boy who has very observable signs of autism, obsessively talking about trains or planes or something like that, and stimming in a way that's very apparent and not having empathy. And I'm so passionate about wanting people to understand what the lived experience is, because I think people don't see themselves in the criteria. And I was just reviewing some TikTok videos by an Australian psychologist somebody had asked me about what are the differences between autism and HSP and can you be both? And I went back to review some of these videos, and there's something that she said that I remember being so profound, and I have not been for the life of me able to remember what it is. So what I may do is review that and talk about it in a later episode. If you're on TikTok, her username is Dr. Joey, Joey. And if you look down her feed, she has a couple of videos around HSP. But I just remember it being so profound that the DSM criteria is written all in terms of deficits. And what we need to do is to look at the differences, that autistics do not have deficits. We do things differently. And because the criteria was written by people that were not autistic, everything is seen through the lens of someone who's neurotypical. So going back to this concept about pathological demand avoidance, if you have a child or if you look at PDA in children, often what you see is them looking like they're being defiant, that will often tell a parent to shut up or don't sit there or don't do that. But it's a nervous system dysregulation, and it's not something that they can control. And when they don't feel in control because their nervous system is dysregulated, they will engage in what's called equalizing behaviors. Don't sit there. Don't touch that. You can't talk to me. And if you're looking at this and you don't understand autism and you don't understand PDA, and because these kids are often very social, they're very outgoing, many practitioners, including myself until the last year and a half or so, didn't really understand what the lived experience of autism looks like, especially in high masking, late diagnosed females. And I just read a terrible, terrible article that talked about the differences between autism and HSP. I'm very confident that it was written by someone who is holistic, not autistic, probably not neurodivergent. In the end, there's a quote by Hans Asperger, who was a Nazi and believed in eugenics. And I remember a time when I really wanted to understand the differences between HSP and autism, and it often comes down to, as the DSM says, deficits in social functioning and deficits with repetitive and stimming behavior. That's not the exact verbiage. And when you look at autism through this different lens of differences, it's just not there. And our thinking and deep processing is a form of stimming and repetitive behavior. But we think of things like hand flapping and rocking as being stimming and repetitive behavior, or asking about the same things over and over again. And the lived experience is just so different. I just feel incredibly passionate about wanting people to understand. I mean, if I had my fantasy, I would love to see researchers and experts in the field of ADHD, autism, and HSP all sit down together to work collaboratively, because there is so much overlap. And I'm working with a new therapist who's ADHD, and autistic, and has a PDA profile and has kids that are also autistic. And her belief is that at some point we're going to realize that they're all the same, that there really isn't a distinction between them. If you find this offensive, I don't know what to say. I feel like every time I sit down to record, I struggle because I don't want to disenfranchise anybody, and I'm just repeating what I've heard. And I do think that there are so many more similarities, but people seem to want to find that thread that separates all of them. So back to this concept of PDA. If you have a child who is PDA, you want to create a low demand environment. And it looks like, for parents that like to be authoritative and authoritarian, that you're letting the child be in control. And it's really lowering demand so that you can regulate your nervous system, or the child can regulate their nervous system. And because we know autism is genetic, oftentimes parents have a child that's diagnosed autistic, and then they start seeing similarities in themselves when they start learning about autism. So you have a neurodivergent parent, or parents that are raising one or more neurodivergent kids. And the parents may also have pathological demand avoidance or pervasive drive for autonomy, PDA, and trying to keep your own nervous system regulated while you're trying to parent a child whose nervous system is constantly dysregulated can be very, very challenging. So how does that relate to what we're going to talk about today? I have really been seeing, I suspect that this first year of being formally diagnosed is going to be a year of ahas. And while I'm recording this, it's just before Christmas time. I honor whatever it is that you celebrate. I'm just sharing what's going on in my world right now. I used to love decorating for Christmas, and I used to love putting out the decorations and the ornaments. And then when we had kids, the kids obviously wanted to be involved. I didn't know I was autistic. I didn't know I was PDA back then. And it felt like, without realizing it, that I just lost control over something that I loved. And my way of dealing with it was to not be engaged at all. And my husband basically took over decorating, doing stuff with the kids, because I felt like it wasn't my thing anymore. And I just didn't, I didn't want to share it with the kids. I didn't have the awareness to know what it was and maybe to figure out some ways to make it work. This is the first year that I initiated getting the tree the day after Thanksgiving. We were out, one of my sons and his girlfriend was here, and we were out shopping, and we were right next to where we would get a tree, and everybody had forgotten. We talked about it. And normally I just wouldn't say anything, like I'm the only one. And I said, hey, what about getting a tree today? Because we had the grown kids in the back of the van, we didn't know that the tree would fit. It worked out fine. And they set up the tree, got the lights on, and everybody was outside. And I thought, I want to put ornaments on it. And I started doing the decorating. Just the emphasis on that just bothers me. So I'm going to say it again. And this is part of me being pedantic. So I started decorating the tree. And then it's interesting too that every year my husband takes out all the decorations. We have a lot, it feels like to me. I'm sure to other people it's not very much. I get very overwhelmed. So he will take out the decorations and then he'll say, please put them wherever you want. Well, last year he took pictures of where everything was so he could set it up the same again because I put it where I liked it. And it was really interesting when I was watching him look at the pictures and set things up the same way. Had I not known that he'd taken pictures, I would have gotten there and told him to do it differently. And I thought, I think that's my PDA, that I'm wanting to be in control of something and he's doing it exactly the way I set it up last night. And I commented to him, and fortunately, he doesn't have a need to get into power struggles with me. He is such an easygoing man. It's probably why our marriage has been as easy as it's been, because those things just don't ruffle his feathers. But I thought that was really, really interesting. And then I noticed I had a really stressful week. I had something happen that was just very upsetting. I cried a bunch of times. It had to do with somebody that I care about that I've never talked about to you. So if you think it's somebody I've talked about, I've never talked about this person. This person was really going through a struggle, and I felt very frightened and very fearful. And I got a very distressing phone call one morning. We were in the kitchen. And then when I got off the phone, I could feel that powerlessness. It activated my PDA. And I wanted some equalizing behavior because I was feeling so powerless. And I was aware of it. I said to my husband, I feel like I want to pick a fight with you. And I explained that I was feeling powerless. And he's like, okay, go ahead. There's something about being able to name what's going on, and for him to not get flustered about it just helped to ease that. I felt really seen by it. The other thing that I noticed is my son is dating a new young woman, and they do a cookie exchange at her house. It's probably a 2 to 3 hour drive from where we live. And she's very sweet. I care about her. She really wanted me to go with her to the cookie bake. She's probably going to be down here. It's right before Christmas. I knew off the bat that it wouldn't work for me for a number of reasons. But I really care about her. And because she really worked so hard to try and make this doable for me, I really had a hard time. I spent a couple days really struggling with this because I know it won't work for a number of reasons. That it's a long day. It's right before Christmas. I would love to have the drive in the car with her, to spend time with her. I'm not eating cookies right now. I don't really want to be around cookies. I don't want to bring cookies home. It's like with 18 people that I don't know. It's a social thing. That's just a lot. And then having to drive home. It just not really ideal for me. And I knew this, and it's funny because I was talking to my husband one night thinking that he would say, yeah, that's not really a great thing for you to do. And his response was, we've all experienced stuff that we don't want to do, but we do it and then we have a good time. And then I felt kind of mad and not seen by him. And I realized I'd had an expectation that I wanted him to say, like, you're right, honey, this probably is not the best thing for you to do. And he didn't. So we talked about that. And then he kind of changed and said, it's okay if you don't want to go. But it still kept niggling at me. And I really had a hard time letting it go. And so we were walking the dog a day or so later, and I brought up again, trying to make it work to go. And this time, he's like, okay, last time I encouraged her to go. This time that didn't work. So I'm going to do it differently. And he just was like, I don't think that's going to work for you. I just had the hardest time like letting this go. And I was talking to Jen about it. And what I realized is my son's girlfriend had worked so hard to let me know, like, there's going to be soft music. There's not a lot of people there. It'll be quiet. Because she was working so hard to accommodate me. And I'm so accustomed to having to decide whether things are going to work based on the data that I have, and having somebody be willing to work so closely with me to make it work made it really hard to say no. And I wanted to call her and have a discussion about it. And I just find sometimes I'm really aversive to being on the phone. I gave myself permission to text her. Are there things that you do not enjoy, and are there workarounds? Because I think we have rules about, like, you have to make phone calls to have conversations like this. You can't text, you can't email. So I'm giving you a permission note right now to make it easy on yourself. So I texted her, told her how much I appreciated it. It wasn't going to work. This sweet young woman, she's like, I talked to my mom and we're not going to be eating the cookies here. So you don't have to eat any cookies. And if you don't want to bake, my grandmother always buys cookies and bring them. So you don't even have to bring any cookies. And then it threw me back into this, like, well, maybe I could make it work. And one of my former guests, Kitty, who I went to elementary school with, lives a little bit in the area. And I thought maybe I could drive up with the girlfriend, step in, say hello for a little while, and meet up with Kitty and then drive home. And that's a long day for me. It's right before Christmas. My boys are going to be home. Josh is going to be deploying for the Navy soon. I really want to be home with my family as much as I want to be there, as much as I keep wanting to make this work. And it reactivated that, like, well, maybe I can make it work. And I just had to thank her very graciously and say no. The point of this story is, I think when we come up against resistance or people don't hear us or we don't feel seen, it kind of keeps us in that, see, I knew this wouldn't work for me, but because she was coming from my position and trying to accommodate me and my needs, it brought this feeling of like wanting to please her, not people pleasing, but like I really wanted to try and make it work. So again, I think that when we have this ability to accept what's going on for us, we have people around us that are willing to work with us, that it softens. I still had to get clear on what would work for me or what wouldn't work for me. But I think these are all really important things. There was something else about PDA that I wanted to share with you, and it eludes me at the moment. So I think what I'm going to do is move to something else, and if the PDA thing pops back up, I will tell you. I've told you at Aquafit that I have my little vocal stim, and more people are doing it in the pool. I just say it brings me joy. We had a new instructor. I may have shared this with you. So no, I don't think I did, because this was just last Thursday. We had a new instructor, and so a few of us are chirping in the pool when we do one specific exercise. And I invited her to chirp with us, and so she practiced, and she's like, "Burr, burr, burr." Oh my gosh, I felt so seen and held. It was just really beautiful. I think there are ways that we can bring our differences, our needs to situations. And it's not like I have to say to everybody, I'm autistic and I've discovered a new vocal stim that brings me joy. I just call it my happy chirp. And I was in the kitchen this morning and I've noticed I'm starting to stim a little bit more at home. And I chirped a couple times and Steve mentioned it. And it's funny that we talked about it and it kind of brought up a little bit of shame for me. I'm rewatching all of Grey's Anatomy. I'm really enjoying the repetition and just kind of revisiting it. And when I see people on the show that scream when they're in pain, that is so foreign to me. If you're a long-term listener, you've heard my appendix ruptured before I was a senior in high school. So I was 17. It ruptured on a Wednesday night. I didn't go to the hospital till Thursday night. They were touching my abdomen. They admitted me for observation Friday morning. I said, I'm really uncomfortable. And they took me in for exploratory surgery and my appendix had ruptured. I don't know where I got the message, but I just learned, like, you do not scream, you do not make noise. You know, he'd press and I'd say, that's very uncomfortable. That doesn't feel good. I think in some ways I have a very high threshold for pain. But the thought of screaming and vocalizing, and I remember my husband was in the ER once. They did the EKG leads that have the sticky stuff on them, and he's got hair on his chest. And when they pulled it off, he yelled something. I'm not going to say what it was, but it was a swear word. And he just yelled it out loud. And because I wouldn't do that, it's really hard for me to imagine it being okay to make noise. And when I was a kid at the table, I would make little noises while I ate. I'm imagining it something like, and my dad didn't like it. And somehow I learned to not make noise. And so this morning when I chirped in the kitchen a couple times, I had this feeling of being exposed. So much of who I am has gone underground. And if you think about stimming as a way of releasing energy, whether it's to regulate your system, whether it's because you're feeling stressed or anxious, and that can't come out and be released, what do you think happens? Probably more depression and anxiety, one, the other, or both. And I think that was so much of my life was about having to go underground and hide my needs, most of them. So I'm having this joy and feeling more free, and I'm also having some self-consciousness around it. And I was noticing with winter now, I'm in California, so for all of you that are living where there's a real winter, feel free to laugh and disregard this. But this is true for me. I think historically around this time of year, something changes in my biorhythms. Historically, I've called it depression. I don't think it's depression. I think that animals hibernate in winter, the temperature drops, and whatever the drop is for us here in San Diego, it's obviously not the same if you live where it's snowing. But I think our bodies in some ways do slow down. We want to hibernate. We want to be inside more. I think historically I've misinterpreted those feelings And probably because I was struggling with food and was eating a lot of sweets. And then that really, for me, it often affects my mood, how I feel about myself. Then I feel guilty, I feel shame, and then I don't want to move my body. If you are struggling with any of these things right now, it's okay. It's okay to do what works for you and what calms and soothes you. This is not to give you fuel to beat up on yourself, to feel bad about yourself. I'm just sharing my story and what I'm noticing. And I'm struggling more with getting things done. This will be now the third episode that has no show notes, no cover art. I'm recording a fourth episode today with Jen. And normally when I'm done, I like to knock this stuff out and get it done. I find that I'm not coming into the office to get extra work done. If you look at my productivity as far as just managing things, I'm barely managing, but my mood is good. And I'm taking care of myself, and I'm going to Aquafit, and I just finished reading a book that I want to tell you about. So I think that how we interpret what goes on often will impact the story that we tell ourselves. It's okay if you need to slow down now. I know my body is just more tired. I went to Aquafit yesterday. I really wanted to leave. It was hard. I stayed for the whole thing. I'm not paddling as much. I feel like my world is getting a little bit smaller. That concerns me. The group is doing some paddles that, it's not that the paddle is challenging, but where they launch from is steep and rocky after I fell and broke my wrist. And it's at night. Concerned about, during the day, it feels a little bit precarious for me. For somebody else, probably not. But thinking about walking my boat up and down this relatively unsteady slope doesn't make me feel good. And it bothers me because I feel like there are times when I love paddling and I feel adventurous and I want to do stuff. And like, now, not so much. I don't want to be cold. I don't want to be wet. And trying to hold that lightly and with compassion and knowing that this may not be for forever. It may be. I don't know. But how can I hold that lightly and be gentle with myself about it? Are there things that are going on with you with the holidays? Has your movement changed? Has your eating changed? And if it has, it's okay. That this is kind of a time when there are more parties and more things around and things that may work or not work for you. And it's okay. Like, there's no way that you can screw it up. You can't do it wrong. For me, what I've noticed is I've made some changes to my diet because I was having back problems and was concerned about some inflammation. And there's a way of eating that I've done in the past that worked for me. And what I notice is my mood is just so much more stable. So in spite of this feeling of like, I'm more tired, it's harder to get things done, I feel like I'm not as productive as I normally am, I also noticed that my mood has been very stable, and that is huge. I'm going to jump over to PDA because something just popped in my mind that I wanted to tell you. Another way that PDA is showing up is that Steve is often the one who will walk the dog in the mornings or the afternoons. He's retired. I'm not. And for 2 days, he would get on his shoes and say, I'm going to walk the dog. And I really wanted to go with him, but I felt like it didn't give me enough time to prepare for the transition because I also had to get my shoes on. It felt like a demand. If I want to go walk the dog, I have to stop doing what I'm doing. I have to get my shoes on. I have to leave right this second. And it bumped up against my PDA. And I didn't say anything and I didn't go with him. And on the third day, not when it was time to walk the dog, I said, I've noticed my PDA coming up and let me tell you what's going on. And so I said, I'm wondering if maybe 5 to 10 minutes before you're going to walk the dog, would you be willing to just say, hey, I'm getting ready to walk the dog in 5 or 10 minutes? He's like, yeah. Do you want me to ask if you want to come? I'm like, no, that's a demand. If he says, hey, in 5 minutes, I'm going to walk the dog, do you want to come? That is a demand. And so if he just announces what he's going to do, hey, I'm going to be walking the dog in the next 5 to 10 minutes, it is not a demand. It doesn't activate my nervous system. And then I can go, yeah, I'd love to join you. Or I can say, not going to go today. So he's been really good about doing that. And if you don't understand PDA, you may be thinking this sounds like I'm just trying to be controlling and bossy. And that's okay. It's okay to not understand it. And if you are someone who likes things done a certain way, you like the dishes put a certain way with the cup handles going a certain way, you want the dishwasher stacked a certain way, you want your partner to drive a certain way, you want them to signal at a certain time, You like things to be in a very specific way. What happens to you when that doesn't happen? And are you able to leave it? There was just an episode on Grey's Anatomy when Bailey starts having some OCD based on some trauma. And while it's very unrealistic, the psychiatrist was observing her and had her do a procedure with 5 stitches, but messed up the order of all the instruments and told her she couldn't fix it. Are you someone that if something is out of place that you feel compelled to pick, to straighten that hair, to pick off that piece of lint? If that happens to you and it's not across all boards, does that mean that you have PDA? No. But just wanting to raise awareness of that. And I think that our culture is so much about get over it, suck it up. The world doesn't cater to you and you need to learn to adjust is such a harmful and ableist point of view. And what comes up when you hear me talk about a kid telling their parent to shut up or to sit down, and does that activate the parent should be in charge and that's disrespectful? But when you have people in your life that are neurodivergent, who says it has to be that way? Why can't we make those changes? And with my kids, I had to find a very different way of parenting, and I made a tremendous amount of parenting mistakes. I have regret. I've talked to my kids, I've apologized, but I also ended up coming up with a way of parenting. If you are struggling, Ross Green, he has a new book out, and I'm not sure what it is, but there's a book that he wrote called The Explosive Child, and there's something called Collaborative Problem Solving, CPS, which is what I intuitively ended up coming up with. And then I went back east and did a few-day training with Ross Green. I'm like, oh, I've been doing this all along, and I just thought I was kind of capitulating, but it makes sense. And now in retrospect, it would not surprise me if one of my kids is autistic, also with a PDA profile. So I intuitively figured this out. The other way that PDA shows up is anticipating things that could go wrong so that you are prepared, so you don't feel sideswiped by things. It can also look like giving people permission to not respond, to it's okay if you can't do this, it's okay if this is too much, because then I have that sense of autonomy. I've already prepared myself for someone else to not be able to do something or to not show up, so that I don't feel blindsided and it doesn't activate my PDA. We're often very, very good at anticipating what people need. We can be over-functioners, over-producers, very great in the workplace because we can figure out what needs to be done so that we don't need to be asked. But if somebody asks you to do something, do you have that sense of resistance? And recently, someone that I care about very much, that I would do anything for, wanted me to do some things. And I found that internal sense of resistance of like, oh, are you kidding me? I didn't say anything because I know that I love this person. I care about them. I want to do exactly what they need. And it felt like these were demands. They were demands. So the last thing I want to end with is I just read a book. It's called Lessons in Chemistry. If you have Apple TV, it's a show that's on Apple. I don't have Apple right now. I think I'm going to wait till the series is complete and then get Apple and binge it. But I got the book, started to read it. It's a great book. So if you love intelligent women that do things their own way, that are smart, and there are some things that are hard about it to read. It's written back in the 50s and 60s when women basically had no rights, but that's part of what they talk about. The protagonist is a chemist. The person that she meets is also a chemist. I don't want to tell you too much if you love feminism, but I will tell you that the protagonist, the person that she meets, and there's a third person that are all coded autistic. Nobody talks about autism. Nobody says the word autism. They're clearly autistic. And I didn't know that when I read the book. I just saw a little clip on TV about the show on Apple TV. But if you love to read, I read it in 3 days. It was a great read. I was looking to see if the author had written anything else, and it doesn't look like she has, but just wanted to share that with you. I think that is all that I have to share with you. I do want to let you know that if you're interested in working with me, if you're curious, if you're an HSP and you're wondering like, some of this stuff sounds familiar. If you want to meet with me and explore if you think you're autistic or not, I'm not doing formal diagnoses, but I can give you resources. We can talk about it. If you're interested in working with me, please go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. I have a form on my website, and it helps me track information that I need to schedule a consult with you. If you Have any feedback about anything you're hearing in the podcast, feel free to shoot me an email at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Registration for the online HSP course. And I am going to redo, if you're neurodivergent, if you identify as autistic and you can tolerate hearing the word HSP in the videos, I really want to redo the videos and talk more about neurodivergence and autism. I don't know that I have the time to do that. I would love to do it with Jen. I just don't think time-wise it's feasible. So I'm just trying to figure out how to create a course that's specifically geared towards neurodivergent folks and doesn't exclusively use the word HSP. I just don't have it yet. But the next online HSP course is going to be Monday, February 5th through April 15th on Mondays from 3 to 4:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So please adjust for time. Registration will start January 10th and go through January 16th. For $675, and then it will go to $700, and registration will continue from January 17th till January 24th, unless the course fills up. What I probably should have done before I gave you all the data, but I love data and information, was tell you, well, what the heck is it? If you want to know more about the course and you haven't heard anything about it, if you go to my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com, there's an HSP groups page. There are lots of 1-minute little videos of people talking about their experience taking the course. There's a video or two of some people that have taken the course. We're talking about it. There are a handful of podcast episodes of people who have taken the course. And if you go back to, I believe it's episode 223 with Ellie, we talk about her experience taking the course, and she identifies as HSP and autistic. What is this course? If you have never been around people that are wired like you, that get you, whether you're autistic or HSP, this is really a beautiful small group, no more than 8 people. And we talk about things like mindfulness and self-compassion, expectations and disappointments, boundaries, perfectionism, embracing our emotions, self-care, communication, creating a lifestyle that honors you. So it's not only the information, but what happens in group and people sharing and the sense of connection and being with people that you will not hear, oh, gosh, you're being so sensitive. You're so dramatic. You are just too much. This is a place where you will hear other people talking about they're feeling like they're too much, or they're feeling like they're too intense, or getting messages that they're taking things too personally, and how supportive the group is around that. Really, it's what ideally we would have gotten in our family of origin, and many of us didn't get that. And it's really a great holding space. There's a weekly email that gets sent out with a video that Jen and I recorded about that week's topic. There's some additional questions if you want to do a little bit more work. It's very neurodivergent affirming. So if you don't want to have your camera on, you don't have to. If you want to be in your pajamas in bed, if you want to eat during group, if you don't want to do homework, if you don't want to share, if you just want to come and observe, this really is your course, and you get to figure how you want to show up. And these courses have been really transformational for some people, and that sense of connection and belonging and being with people that are wired like you can be really powerful. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. You have a right to feel flustered, tired, overwhelmed, scattered. You have a right to feel joyful and organized and content and goal-oriented. It's okay if people don't get you. You're not for everybody. Everybody's not for you. All of your feelings are okay. How you show up is okay. You are not too much. You are not too picky. You are not too sensitive. You are not too dramatic. You are exactly the way you are. And who you are is beautiful and perfect. You have a right to feel connected, to have a sense of belonging, to have peace. We're humans. Life is going to be messy, and it's not all going to be feeling great stuff all the time. And there is support out there for you, and I would love for you to find it. I think that's it. Have a blessed day.